It's been 2 months and 3 days since the Israel-Hamas war erupted, seemingly out of nowhere. And it shows no sign of ending. Gaza is facing heavy Israeli bombardment. The humanitarian crisis is worsening in the region. The US, China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and other major nations are all involved in this crisis. The global economy is affected. India, the Middle East, and Europe are affected. The UN is warning that Gaza will soon reach a point of no return if there is no ceasefire very soon. And the situation could work out to China's benefit. The situation could even worsen and escalate out of control and become a much larger conflagration. This is a major flashpoint. So please subscribe and let's find out what is happening. This video is sponsored by Eureka Lithium. Here is their ticker on the screen. It's UREKF. So let's first go over what's happened thus far in this conflict. As we know, it all began on October 7 this year with a major Hamas terror attack on Israel. And I'll not go into what the Hamas individuals, the Hamas fighters did. We all know what happened. And this was almost on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, which is considered to be the biggest intelligence failure in Israel's history. So now this new war, the Israel-Hamas War, which was triggered by the Hamas terror attack on Israel, this could be possibly the biggest intelligence failure in Israel's history. And there's also a question about whether Israel did have any advance information of this attack. But that's something I'll not go into in this video. I'll leave it for a different video, perhaps in the future. So it all begins on October 7 with this sudden attack by Hamas, which Israel could not do anything about initially. Israel seemed to be caught unawares when it came to this attack. But so lots of casualties happened, Israeli casualties. Lots of Israelis were taken hostage by Hamas and transported into Gaza. And obviously, Israel had to respond, and Israel had to respond hard. So the next day, October 8, Israel began the response. Israel conducted targeted airstrikes on Hamas facilities in Gaza. And obviously, they cited the need for self-defense and the need to neutralize imminent threats. And eventually, obviously, Israel would want to neutralize Hamas as a fighting force entirely. So, in response to the Israeli retaliation, Hamas increased rocket launches into southern Israel and central Israel, and they even targeted Tel Aviv. Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system intercepted numerous rockets, but not all rockets. So they were able to prevent major casualties, but some rockets did indeed find their targets, and there were indeed casualties from these rocket strikes. By October 11, Israeli ground forces amassed along the Gaza border. So there was the possibility of a potential ground invasion by Israel by October 11. And the international community began calling for de-escalation, and this was led by the United Nations and the European Union. Egypt offered to mediate a ceasefire, but their initial efforts were unsuccessful. By mid-October 2023, a high-rise building in Gaza, which housed international media outlets, was destroyed by Israeli airstrikes. And then Hamas started launching drones into Israel, which was a new tactic in this conflict, which was 1 week into the conflict. By mid-October, a temporary humanitarian ceasefire was proposed, but it quickly collapsed. And Israeli airstrikes continued targeting Hamas installations and the homes of senior Hamas commanders. And then protests in support of Gaza began erupting in several countries, and there were a few protests, counter protests, that supported Israel. Now, as we know, Hamas has this major tunnel network, a huge tunnel network, which they uh, use as an infiltration point into Israel. So Israel began targeting the Hamas tunnel network. So they started doing this via airstrikes. By October 20, a truce, which is a temporary ceasefire, was briefly achieved, but it was broken within hours. The United States obviously is involved in this. They expressed support for Israel's right to self-defense, but the US also called for the protection of civilians. So it's kind of hedging its bets, but it's kind of supporting Israel. Now, Gaza has a major power plant. This was then shut down because of fuel shortages. Israel had closed the borders and all that. So the major power plant shut down, and this made the humanitarian situation worse. It was already bad because of the Israeli airstrikes, which Israel had to do to target Hamas. And now you had the electricity being shut down, and Hamas officials were targeted. The Israelis continued targeting Hamas officials. In between all of this warfare, all of this fighting, Hamas did release a couple of elderly Israeli hostages here and there on humanitarian grounds. The International Red Cross increased its efforts to provide medical aid to the civilians in Gaza, and there was increasing international criticism of Israel amid reports of significant civilian casualties in Gaza. The Egyptians continued to negotiate for a ceasefire and did not quite happen, but they continued. They continued pushing for this. By late October, Israel announced the interception of arms shipments into Gaza, which were allegedly destined for Hamas. Obviously, where else would these arms go? And the Israelis then announced an expansion of Israeli ground operations inside Gaza, which signaled a ground offensive by Israel into Gaza. And international peace delegations visited the region to encourage a ceasefire. But the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, stated that Israel was prepared for a long and hard military campaign. Uh, so that's what's going on at the end of October. And Israel then opened the borders and allowed humanitarian aid into Gaza by the end of October. So when November begins, both sides were claiming victory. Israel was emphasizing that it had these significant military achievements, and Hamas was emphasizing its resilience. They're able to, uh, resist what Israel is doing. Um, so by the beginning of November, at the end of October, the Israelis had allowed, the borders to be open and humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza, and then some evacuations began from Gaza. The individuals who were evacuated were foreign passport holders, people with dual nationality, and those people who needed really urgent medical treatment. The UN in the first quarter of November convened an emergency session to discuss long term solutions to this conflict. And Israel and Hamas began the first indirect talks for a more sustainable truce. But this was all just words. Thus far, nothing really happened. Mr. Guterres, the UN Secretary General, he highlighted the severe impact on children and in Gaza, and he demanded a ceasefire. By mid-November, Israeli tanks advanced towards Gaza's Al Shifa hospital, and Israel claimed that this hospital was sitting on top of Hamas tunnels. And by November 15, Israeli forces, IDF forces, entered this Al Shifa hospital, and they did discover a tunnel that was used by Hamas. So Hamas was using this hospital as a cover for its military operations and its tunnel. So this is what was discovered in mid-November. Then on November 22, Israel and Hamas announced a 4-day pause in the fighting, which allowed more humanitarian aid to come into Gaza. On November 24, Qatar, the nation of Qatar, they brokered a truce, which is a temporary ceasefire, which began at 7 a.m. Israel time. So this was a roughly 7-day truce in which Hamas released a number of hostages, which were mainly Israeli hostages, but they also released Thai, Filipino, and hostages of other nationalities. And Israel, in response, released Palestinian prisoners. And this truce expired on the morning of December 1. Talks to extend the ceasefire collapsed, and Israeli warplanes resumed their attacks on Gaza. That's December 1. Now, the US Vice President Ms. Kamala Harris expressed concern over the high number of Palestinian casualties as the Israeli attacks continued on December 2. Um, so, this is what was going on. Hamas official Osama Hamdan said that his group, Hamas, was ready for prolonged conflict. And Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, he said that Gaza needed to be demilitarized. So this is what's going on. There are Israeli attacks that are continuing on various installations, on various assets that Hamas has in Gaza. Refugee camps have been targeted, which have resulted in the deaths of Hamas leaders, but also civilians. It's caused lots of destructions of buildings. Um, So far, Israel has claimed that they have eliminated many senior Hamas commanders. Israeli soldiers have died in this fighting in Gaza, and other nations, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, etc., Egypt, Turkey, and all, have expressed deep concern about what's happening in Gaza, the humanitarian situation. And most nations are advocating for a two-state solution. And as we know, Israel had implemented a two-state solution by giving autonomy to Gaza and allowing Gaza to elect its own government. But what they elected was Hamas. So the latest situation is that the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, have reported that their troops have reached these centers of Khan Yunis, Jabalia, etc. And there's a lot of intense fighting is happening there right now. And in the middle of all this, Hezbollah has also gotten involved in this conflict. Hezbollah is based out of southern Lebanon. Yemen has been involved in some form of or the other. They have launched strikes on naval assets of the US and other nations. The Americans have deployed two aircraft carrier strike groups, one in the eastern Mediterranean, which is mainly aimed at Syria and Russia's assets in Syria. They have deployed another one in the Indian Ocean, in the so-called Arabian Sea, and this is mainly aimed at Iran and Yemen. And they have amassed a lot of naval assets in this entire region. So this is possibly the largest US naval deployment since the Second World War. And because of this conflict between Israel and Hamas, which could rapidly escalate and move to other nations as well, because of this conflict, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor has been affected. This IMEC, this trade corridor, was announced during the 2023 G20 summit in New Delhi. An MOU was signed on the 10th of September 2023, and this has the blessings of the USA. So the MOU was signed between the governments of India, the US, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, Italy, and the European Union. So this trade corridor and transportation corridor is expected to have rail routes, sea routes, and road routes. And its objective is to bolster economic development by fostering connectivity and economic integration between Asia, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf region, and Europe. And this corridor is proposed from India to Europe through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and Greece, and it bypasses Turkey. And Mr. Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, is very upset about that. And Saudi Arabia wanted this to begin ASAP, as soon as possible. They wanted the work on this corridor to begin within 45 days of signing this MOU. And this would have been this is a great initiative. It will increase European exports to India. It will increase Indian exports to the Middle East and Europe: diamonds, jewelry, refined petroleum, sugar, rice, automobile tires, lithium, and so on. We know lithium is a big deal. India has discovered tremendous reserves of lithium in Jammu and Kashmir and in Rajasthan. But the Israel-Hamas war has prevented the IMEC from going ahead. It is completely stalled. Nothing is happening. So the question is, how does this situation help China? Now, before I explain, let me introduce you to the sponsor of this video, Eureka Lithium, which is directly tied to the global demand for lithium. Here is their ticker on the screen. It's UREKF. So lithium is a huge deal globally. Lithium batteries are everywhere, as I'm sure we all know. Electric vehicles, mobile phones, tablets, laptops, you name it, lithium is there. Lithium is so huge that automobile companies like GM, Tesla, Volkswagen, Volvo, Ford, etc., are going straight into the source and are actually investing in their own sourced lithium. Lithium is so important that ExxonMobil, this company that only does fossil fuels, is getting into it. And then there's China, which is the world's largest consumer of lithium. It has a huge appetite for lithium. The Chinese company BYD is crushing Tesla in China. As of today, there are five major hubs or sources of lithium. There's Australia. Lithium is huge in Australia. Then there's the lithium triangle, which is distributed across Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile in South America. There is China, there's the US, and there's Canada. So this company, Eureka Lithium, is the first mover and the first company that has staked land in Nunavik. That's in northern Quebec in Canada. Nunavik has incredible reserves of lithium. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, Ray Dalio, Michael Bloomberg, and Jack Ma. These multi billionaires are all investors in a privately held company called Cobalt Metals. This company, Cobalt Metals, uses the most advanced proprietary AI to scour the planet for the best areas to mine lithium, nickel, and cobalt, and look at exactly where they think there is a tremendous amount of lithium. It's Nunavik, and this is right next to where Eureka Lithium has staked land in Nunavik. So UREKF has a $18 million USD market cap with about 1.8 million USD in cash. The largest shareholder of Eureka Lithium is Sean Ryan. He is Canada's most famous prospector. Sean Ryan is called the Tin Shack Millionaire. He and his wife used to live in a tin shack in the Yukon in the mid 90s when he pioneered and revolutionized the art of prospecting. He single handedly kicked off the second major gold rush in the Yukon. He won Prospector of the Year award in 2011. His discoveries led to the Kofi project being acquired by Goldcorp for $520 million. This is literally $500 million buyout and more. So this guy, Sean Ryan, is a legend, and for the first time in his life and his career, he's going into lithium instead of gold. He is literally the person that's in charge of Eureka's understanding that Nunavik could be the next huge lithium region. And you can see on this map how this looks a lot like James Bay, actually even better than James Bay, where they're already finding an incredible amount of lithium. So this is James Bay and this is Nunavik. And Eureka Lithium is the only company here along with Cobalt Metals. Now, Eureka Lithium have raised the funds and they are going to start drilling their first drill holes very soon, ASAP. So, come good weather in early 2024, Eureka Lithium is going to be the first company to break ground in Nunavik. That's the story of Eureka Lithium. The potential and the upside is tremendous. The first drill holes, they're already funded for it. The market cap is 1.8 million US dollars. They have no debt. So check out Eureka Lithium. Here is their ticker on the screen. It's UREKF. As always, do your own research, do your own due diligence. You will find links for additional information in the description below. So let's get back to how this helps China, how the entire Middle East conflict helps China, how the IMEC not going ahead helps China. So we know that China has this major, massive infrastructure project, the OBOR or the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, One Belt, One Road, which goes along with the Maritime Silk Road. So the Chinese have this project going on, and it's not really going ahead very smoothly. The Ukraine war has put a huge spanner in the works in this project, and as we know, Italy has withdrawn from the BRI, but and the IMEC, the India Middle East Europe corridor, was supposed to be a major competitor and a major challenge and a superb alternative to the BRI, to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Now, if this doesn't go ahead, if the IMEC doesn't go ahead, it is clearly a win for China because then they can push forward with the BRI and offer that as a great alternative to the IMEC and the only alternative to various nations across Eurasia. So if the IMEC doesn't go ahead, if the Hamas Israel war continues and it goes into a slow war kind of phase, then it will be a major win for China. And China already, as we know, has major investments and deals in this region. They are very interested in the Middle East region. As we know, there was this major set of deals between China and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia seems to be looking towards diversifying its approach from the US. It's looking at hedging its bets and looking at other nations like China, India, etc. for an alternative to the US. So there's been this major set of deals between China and Saudi Arabia, which all naturally revolves around energy. And the Chinese and the Iranians themselves, they also have this 25-year strategic deal, which is worth roughly about $400 billion. So China will invest a huge amount of money into Iran as well. So the IMEC not going ahead could be a huge win for China. So, and what can India do about this? Right now, there's not much India can do. India can't stop the war from happening. It cannot end the war. So right now, things are out of India's hands. So this is Currently, a big setback for India, a big setback for India, Europe, Middle East connectivity, and it's a win. It's a win thus far for China if the war just continues, right? So that's the situation. Now, what could happen next? Like I have explained before, more nations could get involved. You could have, if civilian casualties in Gaza mount and they just keep mounting, then the Arab nations, the Islamic nations, could be left with no choice because of popular demand, because of a popular outcry to get involved. And we know that, you know all these nations, if such a thing happens, will be supported by Russia and China. So the major players in the Islamic world are Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And if Iran gets involved, they could blockade the Strait of Hormuz, which could lead to a massive surge in oil prices, which could upset the entire global economy, and could create enormous problems for nations such as India. And it's not that easy to defeat Israel. We know that the US have um, two aircraft carrier strike groups in the region. Like I said, one in the Eastern Mediterranean region, one in the so called Arabian Sea region. And these naval assets are an effective deterrent. So Israel is not feeling the pinch that much like they were feeling initially, that all the Arab nations could group together, bunch together, including Egypt, and attack once again, like has happened before. So that is not currently in danger of happening, but who knows? One major misstep could set off a major escalation of this war, and it could escalate beyond just Israel and Gaza and perhaps southern Lebanon. It could escalate much further. So that is the status at the moment. A new major global geopolitical flashpoint has emerged. The Middle East is always in crisis, but now it's a major flashpoint, right? The US has put naval assets in place, and yet the situation could deteriorate rapidly if somebody um, makes a wrong move. In the meanwhile, the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe trade corridor is blocked. So that's the situation. That's how it has affected India and Europe and the Middle East, apart from the war angle. And keep an eye on North Korea as well as Taiwan. You never know what could happen over there. That is the situation as of today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.